Welcome to the video recording of the presentation Soundscaping as Second Language Literacies, using sounds and voices to revisit urban and gaming spaces. This presentation originally took place at the 14th International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry. This remastered video session was recorded in December 2021 in order to preserve the record for our LSLP archives and for our YouTube channel. Enjoy. Introduction. From eye sensory to ear sensory. As we move across urban and virtual spaces, literacy events and practices appear in multiple shapes. Some are visible to the eye and therefore easier to capture. Others require different senses. Our current inquiries have moved our studies from just looking at words as visible manifestations to looking at the sounds, human and non-human alike, that help compose communities and interactions in the social, physical, and virtual spaces we're visiting. Questions such as, how does the city play with words and sounds to help build language communities? Or, how do games and gamers rely on words and sounds to create aesthetic victory experiences, are now the object of some of our growing inquiries. In this paper, a self-described motley crew of rascals from Colombia will share our ongoing reflections about how we may incorporate elements from soundscaping into our current research. We wish to bring together sounds as both human and non-human data that make part of our work, outlining how soundscaping provides a stronger framework to see how second language interactions are enriching our communities and life experiences as well. So, paraphrasing musician Michael Cretu from Enigma, in the next few minutes, we will take you with us into our world, into the world of music, sound, and noise. Open your mind, take a deep breath, and relax. Our collective understanding of soundscaping. We live in a multimodal world in which we are constantly being exposed to different information through the media and the surroundings. Those messages are presented to us in diverse ways: text, images, sounds, colors, etc. As a result, we must be able to interpret them in order to have a better understanding of what is happening around us. However, non-visual aspects of the environment are still among the least considered characteristics when analyzing a context. As a consequence, important information about the nature of a place is being ignored, which makes it harder to have a complete understanding of the events that occur in a certain place and time. In that sense, soundscaping refers to the collection of sounds that emanate from an environment, physical or virtual, and whose analysis reflects important information about the human and non-human events that occur in a place. By doing this, the perception of these overlooked aspects will help us to complement the interpretation of the other information, visual, textual, etc., presented that can be found in the environment, and it will give us the opportunity to have a deeper understanding of a context and its characteristics. At LSLP, we have been analyzing the role of second languages, especially English, as a means for interaction in urban and virtual spaces. However, our data collection and analysis have focused on visual and written sources, thus lacking a significant use of sounds as a source for information. In this sense, soundscaping will serve as a new opportunity to broaden our understanding of the interaction processes that occur in those places. As we said above, information today appears in different shapes and media. We can communicate and interact with others through diverse means: text, sounds, images, colors, etc. Nevertheless, this does not mean that one medium can replace the others. Instead, the relationship between each one of them is complementary, and it helps us to have a more complete and meaningful understanding of the messages that we are producing and receiving from the context and from others. In this regard, soundscaping will allow us to analyze the effects of sounds in communication and learning within urban and virtual spaces. Urban literacies at soundscaping. As a non-human space, the city has a self-communicating structure comprising images, colors, messages, advertisements, graffiti, tattoos, and fashion, to name a few. That said, we must also factor in the in situ sounds of the city as an additional source of communication. Some of those may be flashy to some, as is the case of sounds from cars and buses, people's footsteps and screams, dogs' barks, or music. However, there are quite a few people who think that those sounds are part of the cultural surroundings and thus categorize them as urban sounds. For our work, we would like to understand soundscapes as both the natural acoustic environment, animals and sounds from trees, water, weather, etc., and sounds created by humans, musical compositions, human activities, sounds of mechanical origin, etc. From this vantage point, noise becomes more than just a fact of urban life. It can actually affect human well-being. As a city, we have acoustic communities, which help us to be aware of what's going on around us. From the avocado street vendor to the church bells and the garbage truck, these signals may seem strange to an outsider, but they are part of the daily life in the city and hold a great deal of information for its inhabitants. To better understand a community, it is necessary to go beyond written data and start an ethnographic study moving across all senses. That is, how members of this community perceive their environment, not only through what they see and feel, but also through what they smell, taste, and hear. This will give a researcher vast pieces of information on how these communities shape themselves. As Thompson reminds us, open quote, like a landscape, a soundscape is simultaneously a physical environment and a way of perceiving that environment. It is both a world and a culture constructed to make sense of that world, end quote. Both relating to each other. In this sense, sounds within a community allow its members to perceive themselves as part of it. That is, to create identity. Sounds and how we hear them are cultural constructs that carry an ideology, as it plays an important role in social order. In the classroom, patterned instructions given by a teacher are heard and acknowledged. It is easy to tell one person from another based on prosody cues. Elders tend to use a different tone when talking to a younger person than when they talk to each other. Sound ethnography, as any other study, should use polyangulation, meaning we need to consider several perspectives to obtain a larger and more accurate picture, and we need to be true to the collected data's nature. Keep sound data sound. Realities around these communities are shaped by meanings adopted conscious and unconsciously by their members. We may ask a comic book fan what the Batman theme means. This music piece may have a significant impact on a connoisseur and none at all on a casual fan. They both belong to the same community, but have a different perception of the community reality. Social realities can and will change as they are constantly moving around perspectives. Helena, one of our researchers, argues that comic books, despite being traditionally conceived as a silent medium, also play an important role in soundscape research. As patterned sounds in a particular community are information-rich pieces, members can easily recall them. While reading comic books, we see sound, or descriptive effects of how a sound sounds, and aided what we already know, sounds that have shaped an understanding of the world. We make sense of those depictions to create such sound in our minds. When we repeatedly see a GIF of someone talking with subtitles, we can come to hear those sounds. The same is true for comic books. Take, for example, the onomatopoeia splat, and how in different panels it produces a different sound depending on the situation and the character. Marvel and DC Comics have both made motion pictures depicting their most famous storylines. It is easy for readers now to recall the sounds in the movies to make sense of what they're reading. This helps us to understand that sounds do not always have to be present to be meaningful. Gaming literacies as soundscaping, or what do sounds tell me about what is happening in the game. Experiences in video games are enhanced by sounds in order to provide information about the game. In this sense, providing high-quality audio in video games is a means to create a realistic experience for gamers. For instance, video games feature audio characteristics which give a sense of identity to virtual environments, such as music and/or background music, and sound effects to the environment. They also provide important information to the gamer of the game, which will be a key factor to achieve victory. In that sense, we proposed a four-pronged frequency-based framework as follows. Environment. These sounds are helpers in the field of bringing satisfying aesthetic experience in video games. Namely, they set up an important emotion atmosphere through different stages of the game. There are continuous sounds. These sounds are presented constantly in video games. They are usually background music to add realism and emotion to environment. Sporadic sounds. These sounds are presented in the game experience, but their perception is quite limited. These kinds of sounds usually appear at the beginning or the end of the match to announce instructions or time limits. They are normally perceived once or twice during the game. Discontinuous sounds. These sounds are present throughout most of the game experience. However, they are not included as a permanent part of the video games as continuous sounds are. For example, sounds of steps in the ground, sounds of abilities made by champions, as well as voices and dubbing depending on the video game. They can also be classified according to their purpose inside of the game. Communication. This refers to how the communicative sounds provide information about future events or hints within the video game. They complete gaps in parts of the game which would not be as understandable otherwise. Communicative sounds are conceptualized by the utility and interactions among gamers. They usually go together with visuals that provide full communicative understanding of situations and come up with solutions to solve the problems that arouse in the game. In addition, it's been recognized that there is information within video games which is primarily focused on the auditory understanding. In this sense, we can consider that visual data is not enough. For this reason, there cannot be a total comprehension of the game experience without these auditory data sources, like ping alerts or voice chats. Finally, identity. This refers to the sense of originality and personality that sounds bring to video games. These include character voices or dubbing, the sound effects which are produced on character abilities, as well as the voice lines and interactions between video game characters and the situations on every stage of the game. Finally, identity, or LAV, provides a sense of belongingness, uniqueness, and realness to video games. This is what attracts gamers to participate inside virtual communities and to develop considerable engagement in gaming activities. Additionally, identity sounds can give a sense of originality to provide reflections of the identity of the gamer inside of the games. That includes dubbing, sound effects, and interactions between characters, including skins and aspects. Everybody has something to tell. Whose voices are heard, whose narratives count, and how are those stories represented? In the city, we are surrounded by a multicultural space where on the one hand we can perceive people find excitement in all the flashy sounds present in the environment, and on the other hand, others are trying to meaningfully engage with the urban sounds. Thus, we are not only surrounded by physical objects that are part of our lives, but also emotions and stories that are part of our experiences and compose our schemata. That is why we can create possibilities to tell stories that are engaging enough to highlight the education value of the listening experience. Bringing soundscaping into education affords us possibilities to use what happens in the city to develop sound and recordings for analytical and artistic purposes. Specifically, we are thinking about all the second languages other than Spanish as resources for the creation of new social narratives and forms to navigate the city. We are thinking that soundscaping then transcends telling a story that everybody can hear. It transforms the possibilities of just being able to bring the story to life. Indeed, when we bring natural sounds and voices together, we can bring to surface the feelings behind those recordings. As Lidley explained, and we quote, "If we take one step back from the soundscape, we find ourselves in oral space, which is the exotic characteristic of the natural, architectural, or electroacoustic environment. It is the product of distances, diffusion and reflection, topography, materials and technologies. Nested within this characteristic, we have the human experience of the soundscape, all of our sound-making endeavors and forms of acoustic communication." This suggests that the human experience in a space and the soundscape are deeply connected by the experiences as human beings. Without sounds, we cannot develop full meanings of the lived experiences. Soundscaping, in that sense, addresses why it is important to communicate exactly what we feel and how this allows us to recognize the cultures, ways to understand language, the prior knowledges, and the memories embodied inside stories and sounds. Each person has a well-to-tell story, and each person has different sounds that have inspired them to be who they actually are. Therefore, we find that recording sounds must be an essential part of our data collection from here on. Each of the sounds has a representation of knowledge, and for us, that will help to develop how the citizens see the city as a non-human space through soundscaping. That said, if we want to create those spaces using second language as a primary tool, we have to create an atmosphere where each of them tell their experiences as they happened and be comfortable as if they were using their mother tongue. Indeed, some people are comfortable telling stories in social-cultural contexts where they can be themselves, instead of having limitations like those we have at the moment of writing, per se. Or as Gershon Van Deventer say, sounds contain layers of intended and unintended meanings and expressions in ways that text cannot. Thank you for listening.